Welcome, everybody. So pleased to welcome you to the next in our series of the Tdsb and OISE webinars focused on environmental and sustainability education. Today's webinar, if you're in the right place, is Growing Authentic Learning in Educational Gardens. We're very happy to welcome some fantastic educators and a principal into the room today as our presenters. And very happy to welcome, of course, all of you as well. I am Hilary Inwood. I am the lead of Environmental and Sustainability Ed at OISE, but I'm always here in the room with my colleagues from the Eco Schools program, who I'm so honored to be working alongside. Jen Vetter is here today with me, as is Chris Metropolis, who is helping, both of them are helping with the background, and also Karen DeBrocke is part of that team, is here today as well. So happy to welcome all of them. Thank you so much for filling out the poll. For those of you who have done so, please feel free, if you haven't done that, to let us know a little bit about who's in the room, and feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We do encourage an active use of the chat in these webinars. If you have questions or you resources to offer on the topics that are being considered, we really welcome you to pop those in the chat and share them with us as we go. So this is what you can expect in today's webinar. We're going to do a little bit of a welcome and a land acknowledgement to begin. And then I'll introduce our presenters for today, Amy Wilson, Joe Jorgensen, Glenn Barbeau, and Anya Belter. And I'll tell you a little bit about each of them as we come up to their part of the talk. And I'll also introduce you at the end to some of our upcoming events. The school year may be starting to slowly wind down, still a month to go, and we still have lots of webinars to introduce you to, and we're always welcome whatever board you're with as part of the work that we do here. To begin, I'm going to just do the TDSB's land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we're hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. I've specifically brought in the work of Phil Cote today. Phil is an amazing artist, activist. He's a historian. He's a traditional wisdom keeper from Moose Deer Point First Nation. He also has affiliations with Shawnee, Lakota, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Algonquin First Nations as well. And I have to tell you, he does a lot of incredible work working on murals, not only around the city of Toronto, but also with schools across the GTA. And I purposely brought this one in. This is a mural that was created alongside grade 6 students just a year ago at Whitney Junior Public School in the TDSB. And I purposely brought this one in today as a reminder of the importance of the ongoing work we need to be doing in decolonization and reconciliation. This sits in alignment with the really horrendous news we got over the last week of the bodies of the remains of over 200 students who were found on a former residential school in BC. This is shocking news, even though we know many lives were lost during the years of residential schools, but it's still shocking news when we find the physical remains of these young students who died as really with the only intention of being educated. This is part of our history of education in this country. So good reminder that we need to continue the work of reconciliation with our students. Phil is a wonderful Indigenous knowledge keeper who continues to do this in such positive ways, using the arts as the way into conversations around the history of Indigenous peoples on Turtle Island, also of the promise moving forward that we can do better. We have to do better, especially after what we have all been through this week. So our hearts go out to all of the Indigenous peoples and First Nations people, in particular in BC, whose children were lost, and know that we are all committed deeply as educators to doing better moving forward. I am happy to say that all of our presenters today are doing amazing work with children on the land, and it gives me great hope that we will, with our next generations moving forward, do a better job in all aspects of decolonization and reconciliation. So I'd like to introduce you to our first two presenters for today. Amy Wilson has worked as a naturalist in the park system, an archaeologist, an actor, and an English teacher in Chiapas, Mexico, before turning to school to become a teacher. She's been working as an outdoor educator with the TDSB for the past 20 years and has been based on the Toronto Island Nature Science School for a number of years, I think, at this point now, Amy. She's created a large raised bed garden on site and is currently working to establish an equally large medicine garden as well, which will be a lovely continuation from our land acknowledgement to hear about that today, Amy. And I'd also like you to introduce Jo Jokinson, who works with Amy. She's a teacher with the Tdsb. She's also worked as an outdoor specialist for several years previous to that. She's also working on the island at the Island Public School, and she has spent much of the year blending her passions for teaching, social equity, and the outdoors with an energetic and enthusiastic grade 1 and grade 2 class. So welcome to both of you. We look forward to hearing about what you've been working on in the gardens on the island.
Thanks so much. I think Amy is going to kick things off for us and just explain a little bit more about what our space looks like.
So there we are. Not that you needed to see our faces. Well, we can go to the first slide. You can see us right now. So just a little background with the garden. I have been there quite some time. I started in 2001, and we are very fortunate to have quite a large amount of space to work with within a courtyard, which makes it even easier. It's a little more difficult at some schools, but this is a space that we have what we call a gazebo, and this is on the north side of the gazebo. And when I arrived, this is actually after it's all been weeded. I had been there a number of years and we were continuing to garden in this space. It's because it's the island, it's predominantly sand and soil was washing away and whatnot. So I spent a number of years before this point, so I don't want anybody to think this happened overnight or within 1 year, did a lot of fundraising in order to completely change the space so that it was a lot more feasible from year to year. So Joe, if we can slip to the next one. This is the following spring from that picture. This is the raised bed garden. Thanks to TD Bank, the TD Environment Fund, and Brickworks, we were able to install 18 raised beds over the course of 2 years using the Backyard Urban Farm Company created these beds. So they're actually really solid. They've been there quite some time. They're still in the same shape. And this really supported our ability to, we didn't have soil erosion. We have warm beds up until much later in the season, made it a lot easier to maintain. And Joe, if we can go on. So one of the things that was really key for us was making sure too that it was an accessible space, so that we created beds that had quite wide pathways. I know people have sometimes said, oh, you could have jammed a few more beds in there, but 18 beds is already a lot to work with. And this allows for anybody to get in and out of the space. Some of our beds, you'll see this one is actually 5 logs high. We did that purposefully to make sure that it was accessible to a broader range of students and adults that come into the space. So these are just some of the things that we've grown at the garden. Having students grow food or be a part of that helps them with their eating habits. They're also much more likely to eat things. The number of children that just grab onto a hunk of kale is pretty amazing. So not always easy to do at home. And then this is a salad that was made just out of the garden. We do try to eat out of the garden. And just a recommendation here, if you are growing, in the center, those are called Hakuri Turnips. You can get them from the West Coast Seed Company, and they take 1 month to turn into this beautiful, mild, crisp vegetable. So that's a great thing to put in your garden, because 1 month is, you can get it in June and it's there by the end of June. So I always like to give them a little shout out. Thanks, Joe, if we can go on. One of the things that we do in the garden too is to encourage children to explore, is to have them make their own biscuits. So we just use Bisquick, depending on what the students' needs are, and they make up their own dough. They have a recipe to follow, and they put whatever they want. We basically have already done a tour of all of the herbs and the different greens that are in the garden, and they put their biscuit together on their own. So that's a great way to get them involved firsthand. Okay. We use the garden for a lot of different areas, different aspects, obviously, using it for art and science and math. Nature journals have been a really, really great way. And they are not just for this, any natural space that you go into, they're very, very portable. And they're a wonderful way to incorporate lots of different aspects of the curriculum. Joe, if we can go to the next one. So it's really straightforward. I know this is very wordy, but it's a really easy thing to do. You take students outside, give them some paper and a pen, allow them to sit in and just feel the space, hear it, listen, and then pick a theme. decide on whether your theme is going to be that particular day, the season, the month, whatever you'd like. Or it could be location, as we said, or maybe it's a species, or maybe you're comparing and contrasting. There's something different every day. Even if you're in a schoolyard with a lot of asphalt, it's still something that can be recorded, and it allows students for freedom to record in a way that works for them. So it's a really positive way of getting into those sorts of spaces. So this is the south part, and I just wanted to highlight what's happened, because these things aren't always easy the way they come out. So this is our south end. This is the opposite side of the raised bed garden, and you can see it's quite a lush space. Perhaps we can go on to the next slide. This space that we had all, and I say had, and you'll understand why, it had all sorts of natural creatures that were joining us. We had lots of different snakes. We had mink, toads, you name it, gulls. There was so many different things for students to explore in that space. Literally, they could spend a morning or an afternoon with some guidance and just searching for things. Unfortunately, things don't always turn out the way you want to. Originally, when I came in, this space was a lawn. So the picture you see on the left, it was basically a cut lawn right up to the building. And my first task when I arrived was to start to naturalize the space by planting native plants and shrubs. The children that you see here are actually in a cut plant tunnel that was created in the space so that they could get in there. These grow about 6 to 10 feet tall, and loved getting inside and hiding. However, not everything turns out the way you like it. So just before you move on, this space, when we came back in the fall of 2018, unfortunately had been completely razed. So there was nothing left. Every tree, every shrub, every plant had been cut down. It was unfortunately a change in staff, and I guess there was a lack of communication. It's something I've realized happens, and we just have to move on. So if you take a look at the next slide, we decided to take that opportunity once we wiped away our tears and decide to move into something that was really significant for us. In conjunction with the Aboriginal Education Department, we were given permission to install a medicine garden. Now, there are I could probably spend the next hour talking about this, which I won't, but the space is quite huge, as you can see. This was a really nice shot of when it first went in, and you're going to see that it did change over time, but we have students. The idea is students will be in there, they're planting all of the herbs that were approved by the elders and the Indigenous department. We have, the sage, sweetgrass, cedar, and tobacco, but there are lots of areas around those outer beds that were also medicines that were being planted. In reality, of course, we planted this garden, and then we ended up with work to rule. We had some flooding, and then COVID came along. So this garden, which actually has sat for quite some time, unfortunately. So if we can go to the next slide, Joe, this is the fall, last fall, and you can see we've already worked our way across part of it, but the space was virtually unrecognizable. These things happen. That's just what, we couldn't control the pandemic. And so we are now working. In fact, the picture on the right was just from, I guess that's Thursday or Friday, I can't remember which date, weeding the
There's snow, so Friday. Pardon me? There's snow there, Amy, so I'm guessing Friday.
Oh yeah, no, there's no snow in that picture. It was cold, but there was not snow. That's plastic. So we are solarizing the garden.
No, I'm thinking from the sky, but it's okay.
Oh, sorry. We're solarizing the garden this summer. So all the plants, any of the plants that did manage to survive the last 2 years, basically we are covering, we're leaving them, but everything else for the last 2 weeks, we've done some intensive weeding and making sure so that we've got plastic down to hopefully take care of a lot of the weeds that are coming up over the course of the year. We still had an unfortunate incident last week where a riding mower was brought into the space and did quite a bit of damage around some of the beds. But that's where I want to point out to you that when you start this kind of project, make sure that, all the teams are involved. But signage is really important. That's what I've come to. We really need to put signs up so people always understand what's happening, especially when you're not there. So that's just a little background on our spaces and where they're headed and what's happening with them right now. And I'll turn it over to Joe.
Thanks, Amy. So again, we acknowledge that not everybody has access to the extensive outdoor learning environment that we do over at Island Public School or IPS. We're so fortunate. But while this presentation focuses on a lot of the work that we do within that space that Amy has just shown you, I want to make sure that everybody understands that a lot of what I'm going to talk about and a lot of what I'm going to present in terms of projects are easily translated into all kinds of different growing spaces. So the most important elements here are helping to foster healthy connections between children and the outside world. So the first thing I want to start off with is I want to preface this conversation today with the fact that there's a tendency to think of gardens only really in the spring or purely as spaces where specific plants can be cultivated. And it's really important to widen our scope to embrace gardens as growing spaces, to embrace all of the plants that may find themselves there, and to really acknowledge that life happens in all seasons. So we need to extend our relationship to growth, nature, and change year round. And so hopefully we're going to give you a few ideas here in the next few pages for how that can work. But first and foremost, I'd love everybody to take just a moment to consider the sensory impact and the potential any growing space has to allow students to observe life on any number of levels, from the micro to the macro, within spaces, even the one that I'm showing a picture of right here, which is just a small pocket garden that's been installed along a fence. Just thinking about, the number of different interactions that students can observe there and indeed have themselves. So we're looking at potatoes in a bucket here, which is a great growing experiment. If anybody has not had a chance to do it yet, all you need is some soil and some cut up potatoes that have been dried a day or two. And this becomes a growing space. So really any growing space can be a place where things grow. It becomes a laboratory, a habitat, an artistic expression, a source of food potentially, but also peaceful spaces and even learning places. Some tools that Amy and I have discussed and think are always helpful to have on hand if you are in any growing space. First off, a first aid kit should always be handy. Some tools and think super basic. Spoons, trowels, popsicle sticks are excellent here. iPads or cameras for pictures. I think with my own class, the iPad is probably the one tool we use most often in the garden. Measuring tape, but again, if you're working with younger students as I am, those centimeter fingers or meter wide arms are always helpful. Thermometers, just so we have a sense of measurement in different places, and they can be, air thermometers like the one that we're looking here. You can also even consider taking ground temperature, buckets or large containers. And finally, a phone or walkie-talkie. You never know if you have an emergency, and you never know how close you're going to be to the school. So we all know curriculum connections exist and can be integrated across all platforms. So you've got science, language, math, art, phys ed, of course, health here, social studies. So we're just going to walk through season by season and take a look at all of the different things that we can really take a look at in our space each season. So as Amy mentioned earlier, autumn is an excellent time for harvesting foods, definitely sampling them. Again, we've made a lot of kale eaters out of the students at IPS. Contemplating and considering differences between what we mean when we call something a weed versus plants that we may wish to cultivate. Considering native or non-native species of plants and even insects and birds. Considering diverse perspectives and practices, particularly when we're thinking about using growing spaces as a place to even celebrate seasons and the food that we produce there. And again, autumn is also an excellent time of year to find creatures, count them, consider adaptations, observe changes. The students in this picture are actually taking a look at a butterfly habitat. Amy had found some hungry caterpillars in the autumn and placed them in the habitat where the children delighted in watching them create their chrysalises and then studying them. It's also a great time to talk about growth and decomposition. Watch as seeds start to emerge from plants. It's a great time for counting. These are students counting some seeds as a group, lining up snail shells, considering all of the components of soil. And this is a project that we had a class do in the fall this year. All it required was a pine cone, some vegetable shortening, combination of cornmeal and oatmeal. Dip all of that into a big bucket of seed. And this is a picture that Amy managed to capture of a chickadee actually enjoying the product of our work. And again, this has any number of curriculum connections. So winter, while our garden is resting, we can observe some of the animals looking for food. It's a great time to befriend things, consider some of the plants that can be grown under all of the layers in winter, have discussions about dormancy and ways we can identify trees and other plants that may not have leaves at that point. Another great project here, we created ornaments using many of the things that we found in the garden at this stage of the year. And then you can decorate the garden space or your outdoor space with the results after that. Spring, of course, we're fortunate to have resources and capacity for a full-blown maple syrup operation on site at IPS. Tdsb schools can schedule a visit. So if that's something you think your class would be interested in moving forward, definitely for next year, I think we're on for that. It's also a great time to observe how plants and trees begin to change, showing signs of spring, what happens before leaves come. Take a look, observe that, go for a walk. Seedlings can be planted and tended indoors as early as February. And of course, this is a great time to go to stores or identify or take cuttings from plants you've identified in the autumn and roots and branches. So these forsythias, even in the first picture, are a few weeks along. When we initially got them, they were bare branches and they explode in these lovely blossoms. And if you're lucky, like we were with these ones, they eventually leaf and root. And then the students here are planting them in the garden. And this should be the result come next year. So again, this is stepping away from just purely looking at seeds and things that we eat. But also, if you are interested in planting things that you can eat, look for hardy perennials, early producers, things that have multisensory appeal. So different textures, different scents. Consider cultural contexts. We highly recommend the Hakuri turnips that Amy had mentioned earlier, but also things like watermelon radishes, peas, beans, potatoes are great. And then hardy herbs like kale and sage. And I highly recommend if you're going to go for something like the hardy herbs and greens, perhaps get those as seedlings instead of trying them from seed. So again, summer tends to be the period we have least access to the garden. You probably don't want to plant a lot of plants that tend to need a lot of care and tending in the summer months. So this can be a great time of year to focus on things like supporting the plants that will be growing through creating things like garden structures like these. You can use resources that are nearby. So the center structure is made from sticks. We've got some bamboo. If you have a crew that wants to work a little harder at building, these are great structures. You can certainly support all kinds of things that you might have planted already. And then lo and behold, when you come back in the summer or at the end of summer, in the early fall, you should be able to find a great harvest waiting for you. So that's all we've got. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't go too far over.
No, that was perfect for both Amy and for Joe. Thank you so much. Fantastic photographs and so exciting to see what's happening on the island. Oh my goodness, what amazing gardens. And really great to see, Amy. I mean, not great to see. I know you've had some challenges with the garden, but anybody who's run a garden before knows that you can never really predict what's going to happen next. So I think that sharing the realities of what you've been through is actually really useful and a good warning to anybody who's interested in taking this work on.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much. If you have questions,
look for the silver linings.
Yes, always look for the silver linings. Exactly. If you have questions for Amy or Joe, please feel free to pop them into the chat. They would be happy, I'm sure, to address them as they have a little bit more time as we head into our second presentation then. So I'd like to introduce you to third teacher, really, in this case, to Glenn Barbeau, who's been working in Tdsb middle schools for 14 years. And he's organized the creation of 2 native pollinator gardens at Perth Ave PS and also at Samuel Hearn Middle School, and plans to continue developing outdoor learning spaces at his new school in September at Don Mills Middle School. In fact, we were just speculating that by the time we get Glenn together with Dan Kaduak, who's there, there's going to be some incredible magic, I think, that's going to happen with the two, which is fantastic. Glenn also volunteers, I guess, in your spare time, Glenn, geez, with Leaf TO, which is an organization that promotes urban forests and gardens. And he's also a trail captain for the Bruce Trail Conservancy. So welcome, Glenn. We're really thrilled to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Hillary, and thank you to all the presenters so far. Joe looks great. Amy, fantastic work. I know big projects like that can be frustrating at times, but like plants, everything grows on and goes on. So well done. So thank you for the introduction. Let me get my pointer ready. There you go. I'm all good. Okay. So a little bit about me. This is my classroom. I think 4 years ago now. I have a timeline here somewhere, 2017, 18, around then. And you can see it's pretty chaotic. Math is important to me, art's important to me, science important to me. And as a middle school teacher, I really like, taking those wonderful young students that Joe and Amy have educated, and then when they come to me in middle school, I love to give them opportunities to be independent, to have agency, to take responsibility, to tackle big projects. And I think this picture in my classroom reflects that. This spring, I have had a bit more spare time than I normally do. I took a leave a couple weeks ago, but even starting last March with the pandemic and teaching remotely, I was able to get outside and do a lot of these outdoor projects. I do want to give a shout out to Leaf TO. No, they're not paying me to say this. They're just great, and the Bruce Trail as well. And I know many of the teachers here at Tdsb, but the Bruce Trail goes all through Ontario. There's several different clubs. It's fantastic. There's so many organizations, but just these are two that I want to give a special little shout out to. And there I am making my first blaze. Yay! Anyways. So one thing I want to kind of really emphasize is that growth takes time, right? So this is my first kind of garden. It's pretty underwhelming, I'm not going to lie. Like, it's just 2 metal tanks and some plants. Okay. But I mean, it's a place to start. And if you don't start, you can't grow from there, pun intended. So eventually, things grew a little bit. So over the course of the 3 years I had at Hearn before being surplused, I miss it, dear. We were able to put in 5 stock tanks in the back. We cut a large circular garden. We added 2 more rectangular gardens, kind of continuing along the pathway. And we had purchased, this is in 2020 in March, 4 more stock tanks. We're going to put 2 out front and 2 in the back. So really these things take time. Here I made sure that there was some art going because that's important to me. And I'll talk more about that later, and the different plants that went in. So I like the Google Suite, and my principal's always impressed when I can make a graphic. So this is just in Google Draw, and to people's points earlier, documenting these things is super helpful. And I'll give you a tour of my Google Drive if you want. There's a lot of pictures in there, a lot of documents, and a lot of these things you can just reuse year after year. So for grant proposals, I have a generic grant proposal piece, and I just customize it. So for TD, Friends of the Environment Foundation, which Amy mentioned, the Jane Goodall Shoots and Sprouts or something. There's a whole bunch of them, and Canadian Wildlife Federation also has grants. So if you have a generic kind of grant proposal, you can use that to help get your gardens going. And also this year at grade 8s, I asked them to start writing it, right? So why not have the kids do this type of technical writing that might be really novel and something they haven't encountered before, especially in middle school and high school. So I like to break things up kind of before, during, after, whether it's your reading strategies or making a garden. So before you make your garden, there's all of these pieces here. So firstly, permissions and grants and all that. You could do a whole writing unit just on that. And I mean, persuasive writing, the big ask, get the kids involved, do the research, graphic organizers, make a budget, especially with the financial literacy being added to the math curriculum. That's a great place to start. Researching, selecting, and sourcing plants. Have the kids do the work. Have them do as much as possible. You're going to be running around with your head cut off, managing things, but the work, the minutia, the research, all that should be on the students. Okay, make your life easier. And one way they can do that is by making these kind of proposals. So these are all hyperlinks here. See where it becomes a little hand there. I won't open them up now, and you'll get this deck. There's a lot of good stuff in here. There's a graphic organizer, there's an assignment, and then there's kind of these slide decks where students would have criteria for selecting plants. They would name them, and this is where you can get into like botany and taxonomy and scientific notation and all that. They make their images, they consider the bloom times, the dimensions, then they have to bring it down, do some critical thinking, and then, you know, defend their choices. And you can put them in groups, and then each group gets a planner, or you vote as a class. They can make big trifold display boards where they actually plot. They make a garden plot, which is great for math. And again, we're moving to kind of the middle school maths here. So you do want to go from counting and measuring, and now the next step is now plotting and graphing and area and volume and all this and that, right? So these are some links here. The link I used to use was the the North American Native Plant Society, NAMPS. They had a great website, but then it went away. So I cried a little bit. So these are also good. So feel free to click through these. Canadian Wildlife Federation, if you call them and you get a nice enough person on the phone, they'll send you free stuff. So do that. These are all, again, native pollinators. And I'll talk more about that later. Okay, so again, with your before, you know, you saw my first kind of project where it looked like pretty bare bones. Well, not for this one. Incorporating math and tessellations, I had the students create these types of patterns. And again, this is all them. You know, we did like a little model in tin foil, and like we would dip little shapes and make patterns, whatever. Okay, fine. But for this is all them. Okay, I gave them the idea, they ran with it, and I think they did really well. You know. And then this was the finished product. Ooh. Anyways, if you want to take it up a notch, and so my last year at Hearn, I was also the grade 8 Rotary art teacher. I had all my grade 8 students for those 4 planters, there was 1 per class, create mural designs and make scale models. So if you can imagine a stock tank planter and shrink it down in cardboard, I had like 80 of them in the art room, and then COVID. Anyways, that assignment is here. There's the slide deck here, the assignments here, but it's a way to go from like grade 6 tessellations, which look beautiful, to grade 8 public art with a meaning. So this is referencing suffragettes and civil rights movements and women's rights, right? So, but something that reflects the community, that reflects the ideals and values of your school. So, okay, now we're at during, and excuse me if I'm going fast, tell me if I need to slow down, I'm just trying to get through. So this is my little collection at my parents' property. They have a bit of an acreage that I'm the landscaper for. So these are all the tools that I use. However, if you go digging, especially if you're at a middle school, which was formerly a junior high, all these tools exist. You just become best friends with your caretaker if you're not already. They can get you free mulch, they can find you tools, they can get you buckets, they can get you the magical water turnkey. You know what I'm talking about. Find those things. Okay. Also, I'm a big believer in child labor. So like have the kids, again, do the work, carry the stuff. I'm not going to move 30 bags of soil when I have a class of 30 kids who can move a bag each, right? Just makes sense. And so here we have all the preparing stuff. And then also when you're planting, demonstrate tool use and tool safety, like, and don't give the rake to the kid with ADHD, like, you know, pick your battles here. But demonstrate it, make it serious. Kids are empowered when they dig, when they shovel, when they rake. They love it. They absolutely love it. But do, of course, do the safety demo, okay? Planting techniques, rip out the root ball a bit, pre-water the hole, put it in, plant it down. If you're not really explicit about that, it's only a 4-step process. You'll come back to your garden next spring and half the things will be living, and half the things will be dead. And you'll be like, oh, what happened? And then you'll just be able to pick up the plant because the kids didn't follow the right steps. Mulching. If I ever write a book about gardening, it's going to be mulching is everything. Mulch. And it's free. You just go to your caretaker, they order it, and the kids can mulch in the fall, they can mulch in the spring, they can mulch, well, obviously not in the winter, but hey, why not? If there's no snow, they can mulch in the winter, okay? And then signage is also important, as the other presenters have mentioned. So in this case, this is the free soil I get from the Tdsb. It's pretty bad. So you mix it with the better stuff, okay? The mulch is fine, the soil's gross, but make it work. So also with the stock type planters, what you can do is in preparation, you do a bit of a recycling drive, and you'll notice that the bottom third or even half, depending on the size and how deep you want to go, et cetera, is just reused, is recyclables. And what a great way to have a recycling drive. If you set it up in your foyer of your school, kids can drop it in, you have a school contest, et cetera, ensure that like they're rinsed and they're like not going to go rancid, obviously, but and then you put screening on top, you put your soil on top. And this PDF, you'll hyperlink. I reference this PDF every year, and there's a link here and Look for it if you're going to go stock tanks. Again, though, you can also break ground. And here's a picture of us actually breaking ground. So in grade 8, the circle is the big foci for math. So like there's a lot of great math we could do. We made like a little rope post fence to put around it. The kids had to figure out the square footage or square meterage, the area and the perimeters of all these different things they cut. And again, they're the ones who edged this, tilled the soil, did everything, right? And you can always build up. You don't always have to, you have to dig down a little bit, but always raising up makes the work a lot easier, especially if you have really compacted soil, right? That you'd find in a schoolyard. Okay, so here's the during. Again, you demo, you break them up in groups. Many hands makes light work. At the Perth garden, a community volunteer came in. We just went out in the school newsletter, and it was wonderful. A young mother whose child was not yet a student. She said she came over and she's like, I've experienced in a greenhouse. Can I help? And I said, of course. And it was so beautiful. She says, I just want to pay it forward. So when my child goes here, they have a beautiful garden to enjoy. And I like cried a little bit. It was beautiful. Okay, and don't forget to document. Don't forget. I didn't document enough at Perth, so I didn't have pictures of the kind of proposals they made, so that's my fault. But I made sure to do so at Samuel Hart, okay? And the documentation goes with the after piece. Celebrate and really, social media, tagging all these people. I have received a plethora, a multitude, a garden full of free plants, of tools that have been loaned to me in my classes, obviously, my schools, just by tweeting out at people, right? So even if your Twitter account is not for your whole professional practice, but just for your gardening, it will pay dividends, okay? So please, please, please. Students love watering and weeding and mulching. You'll see a picture there, especially in grade 8 when they all think they're big, strong men. They love to race, do it. But also afterwards, think about expanding your learning garden, right? Like what's the next logical step beyond maintenance? Like what's complementary or what's supplementary or what's adjacent? And now let's quickly talk about cross-curricular integration. So I'm glad that Joe kind of gave the kind of primary kind of grades. That's fantastic. This is a little bit more of the middle school kind of version of a lot of those things that you just saw. So again, so the signage really going into, I don't know if you can see it there, but going into the scientific name in grade 6, biodiversity. The old school like taxonomy version of it is still really cool. So you can incorporate that, but then really have that focus on biodiversity, right? So for language, this is a wonderful favorite quote of mine. It is spring again, the earth is like a child that knows poems by heart. I write that on the board every spring and the kids go, oh, what's that mean? And we talk about it, it's beautiful. So poetry is a great, great, great way that you can use your learning garden. Haikus are literally about a moment, a turn in a natural environment. Like that's there. If you're to break down the main elements of a haiku, it's that. So, I mean, if you have a garden, it goes together, right? Odes, have your student like research big historical fancy odes, and they write an ode to the bearded fox tongue plant or whatever, or to the blazing star. And there's a song, Oleander by Sarah Harmer. I listened to it. The kids love it. So, and it's an ode to an oleander. List poems as well. Nextly, not just fiction and poetic descriptive language, but like nonfiction stuff is really important for students to be experienced with. And that's promotional materials, that's infographics about the garden. Again, have the kids do the work. Why are you doing the work when they can do it just as well? Nextly, this is where you get into kind of formal grant writing and proposal writing. I have some templates if you want to share that with your students, just email me later. But again, the kids should be asking, and adults are more prone to say yes if it's from an ambitious, plucky 13-year-old than from another adult, right? And then you can have debates and accountable talk and persuasive writing pieces. So we pull up the dandelions. You'll notice I didn't edit that there. You know, what is the importance of native plants? And then also, this would be a really fun debate, especially for grade 7 science. You can integrate your language. If a species is non-native, is it necessarily invasive, right? Like, how can different things find places in ecosystems? So language, math. I really want to stress this idea of comparing units of measurement and talking about liters. Often young people, in my experience, don't know what a liter is. They don't know what it feels like. They don't know what it looks like, right? And these are essential life knowledges. And then if you really want to do some fun math, can get really complex. Think about what is a linear measurement versus a square measurement versus a cubic measurement, and how can we jump back and forth? It's so cool. And you can see just all the math in here. It's crazy. I hope your minds are just going. Sorry. Nextly, geometry, you know, polygons, rotational symmetry. You see what I did earlier with the tessellations, Fibonacci and fractals, and then you have your financial literacy, which I mentioned before. Okay, so science. So I'm going to give you kind of the middle school breakdown. For grade 6 biodiversity, you can talk about the taxonomy, but literally the biodiversity. Why is it important to have a diverse garden with different bloom times, different heights, different colors, different, et cetera, et cetera. Grade 7, there's a strand, interactions in the environment, where it literally talks about these things. Grade 8, I was thinking, wouldn't it be so cool if the kids can prepare their own slides of a plant cell? Why are we getting prepared slides when they can just go out to the garden and get it? There's going to be living, you know, microscopic creatures in that soil. Pull out the soil, rinse it out, now you have a microscopic creature, right? So there's so much you can do. And then I don't see why grade 7 students can't be thinking about irrigation systems, hydroponics. Why can't they build the substructures that you put the soil over top to water your garden, right? So don't be afraid to push it, man. Like, you can do some cool stuff. So here with the example of, you know, invasive versus an alternative native species. Dandelions, you know, they're brought here because we can eat the leaves. Are they that bad? I don't know. That's a great debate you can have with your class. So here, these are just examples of all that. So nextly, just to talk about the journals, I found this book, Field Notes in Science and Nature. It's a hyperlink there if you want to go find it on Amazon. And it kind of takes what you might think as, oh, pretty nature drawings, and it gives it the scientific context of it. Because before photographs, scientists and naturalists especially were artists, right? Medical doctors were artists. They had to draw these things that they discovered. So it's a really fun way to kind of, if you want your middle school kids to feel like grown-up scientists, then, you know, call it Field Notes. Social studies, I just really want to point out, I want to talk about the medicine wheel garden because we already had a great example of that. But historical gardens like pioneer gardens or settler gardens, but also international or cultural gardens. If you have a community that, you know, has a particular palette or whatever, can you plant those things? Why not? And something else I saw was a provincial flower garden. So if you're going to do your Canadian social studies and, you know, each province has its own flower or shrub or bush, wouldn't it be cool to kind of recreate that? There's links here to all these organizations and these different resources and focus on sustainable development, conservation, and stewardship. And then this is an extension. I'll let you look through this on your own, but literally all the steps are here, okay? And it's linked for you. And then there was one last thing. I'm running out of time. Miscellaneous resources are here for you to look at as well. They all kind of go through my Twitter. Not that I'm trying to like solicit followers, but I am. And I just want to say thank you so much. Please explore these links. Email me if you have any questions. Everything I hyperlinked is view only, so make a copy. If Pearson approaches you and offers you lots of money for it, let me know. I'll take it. But otherwise, it's free for you guys to use as you see fit. Okay, thank you so much.
Wow, Glenn, what a fantastic presentation. You had so many rich ideas for doing learning with children of all ages, really, in your garden. So thank you so much. I'm assuming then you're probably okay to share the link to your slide deck for others because there's so many fantastic resources built right into it.
Exactly. Yes, please.
That's really generous, Glenn. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Amazing. And we still have one more presenter to go. My head's kind of popping off with excitement here about all these things that Joe and Amy and Glenn have introduced us to. And at this point, I'd like to introduce you to our last presenter for the day, and that's Anya Belter. Anya has got over 30 years experience as both a teacher and the last 15 as a principal. She's worked at 3 different schools as a principal, and most recent years at Heather Heights, and is currently at Heather Heights and the Ben Hepner Vocal Music Academy, but formerly was principal at Taylor Creek. And I think, Anya, if I'm remembering correctly, that's what you're going to share with us today.
Yeah,
Anya, did you want me to share the clip from City TV that I've got lined up, or are you too embarrassed to show your celebrity on there?
I don't know how worthwhile it is showing, and I don't want to keep people past 5. So why don't we skip it?
I'll include the link. How about that?
Sure. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. And Amy, Joe, and Glenn, thank you so much. First, I need to really draw a distinction between Amy, Joe, Glenn, and myself in that I don't know. Okay, I can recognize a maple tree and an oak tree, and I now know what strangling dog vine looks like. But other than that, I'm speaking to the people who don't know how to garden. And I don't know how to garden. I just know it's really, really important for kids. I also don't know how to create slideshows, which you're about to see as I attempt to share my slideshow, because it's super pathetic in comparison to what I've seen with you guys. Like my first slideshow is literally going to be, why do you garden? So I decided when I was doing this, because I was coming to gardening without any knowledge or understanding or capacity really to do it, that the first thing that I wanted to talk about was why a garden was really important to us. So looking back at my experience with Taylor Creek, it was formerly called Warden Avenue Public School. It's a school in Scarborough. And really poor reputation. One of the reasons the name was changed was because it had such a negative reputation, surrounded by community housing. So all of our kids were coming to us from community housing townhouses or community housing apartments, a very static community in that they never left the community. If you were born in Cataraqui, you stayed in Cataraqui. Cataraqui was to the right of the school, the apartments were to the left, and they literally would not go to each other's places. So these kids had no experiences with any kind of gardens or forests or trees or anything like that. When I was first assigned to the school as a principal, in all honesty, I would say that I spent my first 2 months there in absolute shell shock, because the kids were disengaged, disenfranchised, not really interested in school, were coming to school with a lot of mental health issues and social and emotional issues, and carrying a lot of weight, and academically exceptionally low. So naturally, I started out by saying, we need to have a garden in our school. And after some false steps, including literally me finding trees and shovels and standing at the front saying to kids, hey, let's dig some holes and do some gardens, we found a more effective way by starting in looking at this nature area. So this is an area that is within the school grounds, and it's a nature study area. And basically all they did was they didn't cut it. And all these fantastic trees and native shrubs and plants and tons of invasive species, as I later found out, started growing in it. But again, it had been completely neglected to the point where it had become a dump for the neighborhood. So we found campfires and sofas and tires and all sorts of other less lovely things in that area. Kids literally weren't allowed to go in the nature area over any of their recesses or lunch hours. So I decided that that would be a really great place to start. And so, whoops, now I'm going the wrong way. Oh dear. Which brings us to how a garden. Look at my slides, they're so professional compared to the other folks. So basically how the garden started with us was by going into that nature area. And this was my introduction to what strangling dog vine was, because the first thing we had to do was rip out strangling dog vine. So somebody told me this is what it is, and this is really bad. And in the left-hand picture there, you can see buckets and buckets and buckets of it being removed. We also got giant loads of mulch, which were delivered to us from Friends of the Rouge Valley watershed, which was fantastic. And they dumped it in the middle of our playground. And speaking about Glenn, in terms of using child labor, every child in that school was toting shovels and buckets and moving mulch like child labor had never gone out of style. And honestly, if kids were having challenging days and they weren't doing well in the classroom, I would say, you know what you need to do? You need to go move some mulch for me outside. And I would sit outside with them and they would move some mulch, and suddenly they go back to the classroom and they would be in a much better place than they were before, because that physical ability to attack things really reduced a lot of our behavioral issues that we were having in the classroom. And then as well, where we removed the strangling dog vine, we started putting in some of our native plants that other people told me about, because again, I don't know anything about these things. From that, we grew. So as Glenn was saying, in terms of documentation, I didn't document anything with photos, which is why my photos are so terrible. But what we did document was the plan. So this was a really important piece for us because it kept us on track. And again, for those of you who know nothing about gardens, like me, we got in touch with the Green Thumbs Growing Kids Garden folks, and they were the ones who really supported us in terms of being able to tell us step by step what to do. So if you don't have that knowledge that other presenters clearly have that I don't, they spelled it out for me, as you can see, step by step. So they gave us that consultation. They told us about the Evergreen Learning Grounds grant, which we were able to achieve. And they sort of gave us this list of things to do. And another thing I recommend is going to visit other gardens, because that's your inspiration. So we took our Eco Club, which had now developed and become a lot stronger, to visit another public school. From that, it grew, of course, and as you can see, we started to do some raised beds on the school grounds, which were fantastic, because we also involved our parenting center in that. We involved our school council in that. We have a summer camp program that came to the school, so they took over in the summertime to do the watering. And the parent council, the school council that got involved with it, anything that was going to be harvested in July and August, those families would come, take care of the plants, and then they would harvest and bring it back. Oops. So what a great opportunity for those families who had a lot of food insecurity to come and use those gardens in that way. We did labeling, which was important for people like me who didn't know a trillium from a foxglove. And yes, the watering was by far the most popular thing. If anything, your plants will drown. So I totally suggest you develop a watering schedule, which is really, really important, because otherwise the children will flood your plants to death. We then went ahead and got a Tdsb design consultation, which was so important. And this is a bunch of different pages put together, but I wanted to share it with people so that you could see exactly how specific it is. Again, for people like me who knew nothing, it really spelled everything out so that I could become the facilitator and other people were the knowledge base. And so our next step was we went to stock tanks, and we also got some canoes, which were fantastic as well to do some planting in. And we did some Indigenous art with that. So it grew, as you can see, with the keeping on slide, and it just continued to grow, but in a very manageable way every year. And at this point, you can see that the entire school was more or less involved with the gardens. So when we started, it was just a few folks who were super involved, and the kids got incredibly enthused about it because everybody was out there moving mulch and moving soil, and everybody wanted to dig holes and everybody wanted to garden. So every class ended up getting involved. And in the meantime, you also saw that the spirit of the school was being elevated, the behavioral, social, emotional, mental health issues, they're still there, but there was an outlet for our kids. So it made a tremendous difference in terms of what we were seeing in the office and in the engagement level of the kids, and building relationships between teachers and students as well. When you're out there moving mulch with a teacher, you treat them a little bit differently in French class later on that day. Just more of the same. This moved into, look at this, isn't it beautiful? We got a very fancy green print for our school in terms of all of the different things that we could do to integrate what was slowly growing, including all of these wilderness modules that we wanted to have over the entire school. This might be the only picture of me looking semi-professional that has ever been taken. So now what? So now that you've done all this fantastic planting and you have all these teachers who are saying, but Anya, where's the curriculum? And honestly, my focus on this was not initially curriculum. My focus on this was initially social, emotional, behavioral, all of those pieces. But then all these fantastic things happened. Like we got involved with this school malaise trap program. So we basically set up a tent in our nature study program to examine all of the different insects. So this was an Ontario-wide study to see all the different insects that were there. And our little people who would be out there identifying all of the different insects. I'm trying to go fast because I'm trying to respect time. Friends of the Rouge Valley were amazing. They came in on a weekly basis, again, because I have no knowledge and all of our teachers didn't either. So they would do lessons on all of these things. And they would be out there spring, summer, winter, doing work with our kids, teaching them about the environment. Eco-literacy, we talked a lot about that, and I have dozens of samples, but just so you can see, we have a kindergarten sample where children are talking about how they feel in the schoolyard. And up here, we had, it grew into an art project that was done. This was on, I can't remember what that was done on and I can't see, but this was actually done in French class. So they took the ecology and they developed it in their French class to do research projects. So it was spreading that way. And then you had a grade 8 project. And so you can just see how every single classroom was integrating what was happening outside the school in different ways inside the school. And yes, at this point, I totally lost control. The teachers, the students, everybody really went bananas. And when I say in a good way, in a good way, it was like the Hydra. It was growing heads everywhere and I couldn't really see where all the heads were, but they were really good heads. So we had, it became a Save the Bees. So then we ended up creating Pollinator Gardens because one class got all on about the bees and the butterflies. And they came to me with a presentation to say, Ms. Belcher, we need to do more to save the bees. We ended up at Casa Loma doing presentations on bees and butterflies. We had students who were creating NGOs in their grade 8 class to talk about the damage that was being done to the environment around the world and presenting these things at school assemblies. I'm going the wrong way again. This lovely person over here was Eco Man because every school needs an eco hero, and Eco Man would show up at every assembly to talk about what was happening. We moved into talking about water bottles, tap water versus bottled water. We had our kids who were coming to staff meetings to tell us what we were doing right. They would tell us what we were doing wrong and what we needed to improve things. So again, talk about agency and empowerment for these kids. Before Me to We was bad, we were heavily involved in Me to We, and we integrated this within our eco-literacy as well. We talked about what citizenship meant, and what it meant to be an environmental steward and an active citizen. We started doing things like collecting plastic milk bags, and the kids learned to crochet. And then these would be mailed off to Africa because they were really effective in terms of kids laying them on the ground and then not getting the mosquito bites and preventing malaria. So when I say it exploded, it truly did explode. We talked about the NGOs, we had the Buy Nothing days. I included this picture because I knew we were an eco school when the kids came to me to say that there was a nest on a doorway and that no one was allowed to use that door until the birds had left the nest. And I had to shut down the door and reorganize where everybody was entering. And some staff member said, "Are you crazy, Anya?" And I said, "You go tell the 9-year-olds in my office that we're going to upset the birds." And they went, "Okay, we won't use those doors." And that's the way that went. We had assemblies, as I mentioned. We were mentioned in the news on a few occasions, and not because of me, but because our kids started showing up at political debates and asking questions about politicians' eco-literacy ability. So it became something that truly was imbued in the entire school. And I do want to stress, if I haven't enough, if you can't tell by this terrible presentation here, I don't know anything about gardening. But when we built the garden at Taylor Creek at Warden Avenue, it changed a lot about those kids. And from our kids being relatively content to sort of do the status quo and live their life and go to the local high school. Our grade 8 class actually ended up being the grade 8 class that per capita ended up going to more specialist high schools and alternative high schools because they were actively seeking opportunities to engage in schools that would really foster their leadership or their eco-literacy or what they really wanted to do in life. And not to put all this weight on your ability to build a garden, but in the case of Taylor Creek and Warden Avenue Public School, I have to say, in addition to other work that was being done, it completely changed the morale and vitality and life of our school to be able to have that opportunity to do that with the kids. It was really a remarkable opportunity, and I strongly encourage all of you, no matter where you are, as the TDSB always says, start small, but do it well. I would also say trust other people to know what they're doing and just do what you can to facilitate it and then get out of the way. Let it happen.
Anya, if that's your idea of not a prepared presentation, then wow, I'd like to see what happens when you... You know what? This is actually a really fantastic end to all of these presentations because you've kind of taken it that next step further in terms of the wider piece of what can happen. We're not just growing plants when we're doing educational gardening with students. We're growing a much deeper connection to the earth and to the land, and we're growing a sensibility and a connection to community, which is so important. And you've illustrated that so well. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks.
At this point, I know we're a little bit over time, but I didn't want to say anything because Anya had great stories to tell. In fact, all of our presenters today. Could you please join me in thanking Amy Wilson, Joe Jorgensen, Glenn Barbeau, and Anya Belter for a fantastic series of presentations. Oh my goodness. I love this because this is a wonderful follow-up to the session we did with Karen DeBrocke and Gail Bornstein from the Eco Schools team about how do you cultivate these school gardens. And now all of you have demonstrated so beautifully today what happens when you cultivate these gardens and the amazing authentic learning that grows as part of it. So thank you so much to all of the hard work that each of you has put into your presentations. Really fantastic. If you have questions, just feel free to stay with us. We're going to just wrap it up. Before we do wrap up though, I want to do two things. One is just to share my screen so you can see what's coming up in terms of webinars. We have a new climate action professional learning community starting in conjunction with OISE and the TDSB's Eco Schools program. If you have any interest in that, we've got an information session coming up on June 2nd. You'd be welcome to join. And if not, I think Jen was going to send some information out with one of the Eco Schools newsletters about this. We'll have a recording after the information session. You can still sign up. It doesn't start until the summer. So we'd love to have you as part of that. We've got our year-end celebration with Eco Schools teachers coming up. This is an opportunity to get together, to share our successes, gripe about the challenges we've faced this year, which have been significant, no doubt, but also really just have some time together to chat. It's really a great social opportunity. But the gardening webinars will continue after that. We've just booked the Growing Natural Curiosity on the Land, which is going to take a look at Doug Anderson, who's an Indigenous educator here in the city, working with students along the Humber to replant some of the areas along the Humber River with native plant species, and also some of the other gardening projects that are happening in conjunction with the Natural Curiosity program. And then finally, we've got our AQ courses running again this summer. So if you are interested in learning more about this and connecting with other teachers who are interested, if you're a TDSB TDSB teacher, or now a York Region District School Board teacher, you get a subsidy from your board to attend, which is really amazing. That these boards are recognizing that teachers need support in order to really bring environmental learning and climate action into their classrooms. So thank you again to all of our teachers. And just before you leave, I'm just going to, if you may, wait 1 second. I'm just going to trigger, I can't do that when I'm sharing. I'd like to just trigger our feedback poll so you can tell our presenters how they did today. Just one question, it'll take you 5 seconds to do, but we always love your feedback on these webinars. So thank you again. And we're going to end the recording now. And at this point, if you have questions for any of our presenters, just hang on. I'm sure they'd be happy to answer them in person for you.